Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Pearsall. I'm the community manager for Second Step and Committee for Children, and I am really glad to be able to join you all this morning for the next in our. This isn't actually the next in our Meet the Maker series of live streams. It's actually a special event that we're doing ahead of the launch of our new Social Emotional Learning for Adults program that's coming out in a couple of weeks, where we're going to get a chance to do a live question and answer with one of the very few educators on the planet Earth who has actually used the Second Step SEL for Adults program, because it's one of our pilot teachers, pilot educators. So I'm really excited to be able to bring this all to you and get a lot of your questions answered by somebody who actually used the program. Before we begin, though, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Committee for Children's offices sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the first people of Seattle, Washington, the Duwamish tribe. As we honor the Duwamish people and their ancestors, it's also important that we consider our place in the past, present, and future history of the indigenous peoples of our region, as well as how we can best support them. Thank you. And now I'm really pleased to be able to introduce to you Keith Buechler, principal at Ben Franklin Elementary in Lake Washington School District. Keith, welcome to the Second Step community.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
And I realize I never actually confirmed how to pronounce your last name. Did I get that right? And if not, how should I have said it?
You're close. It's Buechler.
Buechler. I wasn't actually close at all, but you're very kind.
Got the first letter right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and really appreciate it. We've been collecting questions from people in the Second Step community over the last week around kind of questions they have around using the new Social Emotional Learning for Adults program, and really glad to be able to bring these to you to answer. Yeah. Also, if you're watching live right now, feel free to post questions wherever you are, if you're on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, and we will try to get to those as well. But before we begin, Keith, can you talk a little bit about what your role was and what did it mean to be a principal at a school piloting this program?
Yeah, happy to. So I'll kind of start at the origin and you can kind of direct me from there. Last spring, we were approached with an opportunity to participate in this partnership with Committee for Children and Second Step as they were discussing some partnership and piloting of the social emotional learning for adults. And I'm going to keep abbreviating that as SELA as we go, just because that's how we've adopted it. So if you hear me say SELA, that's what I'm referencing. So from there, we looked into it. We went and did all the necessary back work on it, and then jumped in this fall. And it's been great. Committee for Children and Second Step have been great partners throughout the whole process. They've been responsive. They've taken feedback, and really, it's been a great opportunity to work with my staff in a very focused way about focusing on the mental health of our adults, in all honesty, and the social emotional health of our adults, so that they can take that impact over to our kids.
Great. That's awesome. So I think a lot of the questions we've been getting have been around implementation. And I think the number one question we get is around time. Yeah. So everyone is super busy. How did you make time for the SEL for Adults program? And on top of other kind of professional development obligations, how did you find it fit into your overall PD plan?
Yeah, it's that initiative fatigue we all know about in our education world. So how do you balance all the important things? Because there's a lot of important things, but there's only room for doing so many of them well. So I can say for myself, from a leadership perspective, I'm a do things with fidelity type of person. Don't just do things just to do things. So anything we really commit to and put a lot of investment into, we're going to commit to doing well. So the way we really balance that out with the time commitment is, this is my second year, finishing up my second year here at Benjamin Franklin Elementary. So for us, social emotional learning was a goal anyways. So it did align to some of the school improvement goals that we had and just the cultural goals we had as a school. I would say further though, last spring, as we were exploring and considering this opportunity, it wasn't a hard sell to staff last April, May to say, hey, will it be important to focus on our mental health and on our own social emotional health as adults too, right? For next year. And will that be important for our kids? And when it was a yes, it was like, okay, if we're going to do this, then let's commit to doing it well. And what will that take and how will we do that? So it's not some magic spell that we did, but what we did do is we committed to it. I think if you're going to do anything well, you have to commit to everything it takes to doing it correctly and to sticking with it and figuring out how to make it work. I think that has been a perspective for us to have some success with using it throughout this year.
And I think it kind of leads into the next question that we've got a lot is how did you work with your staff to get buy-in? I think there's often a very understandable skepticism around PD work and PD work like this. Was there anything in particular you did to kind of help get your staff to connect and engage with the program?
No, that's great. And I think it starts with kind of my philosophy for leading with my staff, which is that I really do truly, honestly value their voice and value their perspective and listen. I try to be really responsive, but not, I always balance responsive versus reactive, right? But we try to be really responsive to what we're hearing. They're the folks working most closely with the kids. And so how do we take that voice and honor it while also continuing to make our growth and have our focus areas be what they need to be? So what we did last spring was, after I had started having some conversations with some of the support services folks in our district and with Committee for Children about what this might look like, before committing to it, I saw the value in it. I think the value is easy to see, but I had some of the same questions you're discussing that others have had, right? Like, how do we do this well? Do we have capacity? So I took it to my teams. I took it to my building leadership teams. I brought this into my BLT last spring. My building leadership team. I brought this into my MTSS and PBIS teams last spring, 2 different conversations, said, here's what this is. Here's the other things we intend to focus on next year. Does this fit? Does this align to the direction we're trying to head anyways? And if so, do we see enough value added for ourselves and for our kids that we want to commit to it? Both teams said yes. And then it was brought into whole staff of, hey, here's something we're going to do. How can we answer questions because if we're going to commit to this, we're going to commit to doing it well. And so establishing that at the beginning of good times, bad times, hard times, we're all busy times. If we commit to doing something and doing it well, we're going to honor that commitment. So let's just make sure. And we all saw the value in it. And that was how we got staff buy-in. And I can say, I tried not to use that as a card, if you will, throughout the course of this year, but it was a valid reference point a couple times this year when everybody was overwhelmed of, hey, let's go back to this. This was a commitment. But the other thing I would say we did throughout the course of this year was we were responsive. When we got feedback from staff about time commitment struggles or about how do we do this better or how does this work or fit into what we're doing, I listened and we said, okay, how do we do it better? So how do we change this to make this work? Whether it was changing some of our staff meeting time or some of our collaboration time or those things. So just being considerate of, if it's a goal, committing to it.
I think another question that we've gotten from a few different people is kind of around the kind of engagement with the activities themselves. One of the things that is a little different about this program is compared to other professional development is it's broken up into these little chunks of micro learnings that educators are to do on their own, and then come back and do group processing of the work that they've done on their own. Do you feel like your staff was engaging in those micro learnings, or were they something that would kind of somebody had a better phrasing than this. This didn't get done.
Yeah, no, I got you. So I'm going to own from the beginning that as an administrator, I don't really speak in absolutes. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of all staff answering any question, because I don't think all exists in most contexts within our education construct for adults, right? We all value all kids, some of these things, but speaking in absolutes as far did everybody do this? Did everybody do that? I don't really speak in those terms. But I would say, for the microlearnings, when we were exploring this last spring, and then as we started working on it throughout this year, that was one of the things I actually appreciated about the program was the microlearning construct. When you're asking folks to spend 20, 30 minutes on something, that's a big ask. Sometimes if you're asking them to spend 5 to 10 minutes on taking care of themselves once or twice a week, which is how we started breaking it down over time. We got better over time about figuring out, and I know that's, again, Committee for Children's been great about working with us and how to package this and communicate some of this as part of this partnership and the piloting of it. But that was what I evolved to in the fall. Was I actually just started making calendars for my staff of, at first it was too structured of have this one done by this date, have this one done by this date. Wouldn't recommend that. That just gets stressful because then you feel like you're behind all the time, right? But what we did do was we kind of broke it into chunks and said, okay, you want to have these microlearnings done by this date, and you want to have these done by this date, like couplings or triplings of them, right? And would make sure that they knew in advance of when we were going to wrap up one of the units within the bigger modules. Like, hey, we're going to have our small group meeting to wrap up module 1 or unit 1 on this date. And I would send them weekly reminders in our staff newsletters of, hey, this week you should be working on these things. So never trying to push it too hard, but just trying to continue to create mindfulness of it. And when I would notice that we were getting behind, it would be some of those, hey, you guys, like, in all honesty, if you don't have 5 minutes to spend on yourself, there's a bigger problem at hand here, right? Like, you have to find 7 minutes to take care of yourself a week, right? Like 1 or 2 microlearnings a week is a feasible thing to do. And they've been engaging, and they've had some targeted components to them that people have been able to use. So that was actually one of the pieces I liked about the program with the microlearnings.
That's great. And where did you end up kind of landing, and what did you find was a good pace per, like, it was like a per week?
Yeah, so you know, everything's always dependent on your calendar, because you know, when we would have full weeks, depending, I would always go ahead and look. Sometimes the microlearnings are as short as 5 minutes. I think in a couple rare cases, sometimes I think they were expected to take up to 12 to 13 minutes on the longer end. So I'd kind of try to balance how long they were. If it was 2 relatively short microlearnings coming up next, I'd say, hey, good goal is getting 2 of them done this week. If it was, and again, where I made the mistake the first time was on May 20th, you need to have this one done, and on May 22nd. So just really that subtle switch of like, hey, by the end of the week ending May 21st, you want to have, this is how far you want to be. And by here, it's, you know, without so many assignments and due dates, people felt like they were constantly falling behind on. But 1 to 2 a week is pretty good. I would say for most of the units, containing anywhere from 1 to 10 microlearnings, including the small group meetings, you know, for us, that would be about depending on the time of year, a month to 2 months, about a month and a half was about right for the units themselves. Sometimes we were short as a month, but it just really depends. Do you have a month full of 5-day weeks, or do you have other stuff going on? So it's just being mindful of your calendar in that regard too.
Cool. Did you do anything over the course of the program to help kind of keep your team engaged, or to re-engage with it? Like maybe over the course of it, also like coming back from breaks and things like that?
Yeah, I would say intentional actions that we took in that regard. Again, the whole responsive mindset was taking their feedback. I regularly kind of interacted with them to see how things were going, to see how they were benefiting, to see what challenges they were having. I know in the fall, we had it communicated. I think we were probably mid to late October at this point. Like, Keith, this is valuable, but we're just so busy, which I know principals hear all the time. And my response wasn't, oh, well, then let's not just do it. My response was, I hear that, and I agree, this is valuable. And so since it's valuable and since we committed to it, how do we do more of it? And so I talked with my teachers and said, what would it take for us to feel better about the ask of these microlearnings and about the timelines and things? So we adjusted some of the order of how we did some things. What we did, you know, the agreement that worked for my staff was we have 2 staff meetings a month. We dedicated 15 minutes at each staff meeting to me saying, hey, I'm giving you 15 minutes, jump off of our Teams meeting and go do a microlearning. Or 2, if it was one of those weeks where you could do 2 in 15 minutes. And it just helped them stay on track. I mean, they knew they were going to get at least 2 done a month with time I was giving to them, that they were already going to be using that time anyways for staff. And since for me, that's, yes, my time's valuable too. So I had to figure out how do I make up for the fact that I just gave away 30 minutes of staff meetings a month. But that's a me problem. That's not a them problem. So I have many leadership moves I can do to make up for those things. But again, it's that sense of common commitment where we all committed to it. So I was committed to helping them make it work. And that was one of the twists we did. I know we worked with Committee for Children at one point. Just another thing, like relevancy at times. Like we found we had started one module or unit. It's like, this is good, but we think looking ahead that there's this other piece that might be more relevant right now and twisting the order of things. So we did some of that, just because the whole point is to be valuable anyways, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you kind of go out of order, but it's going to be most impactful, then that's okay sometimes. I would say the last thing we did too was really intentionally tying other meetings back to the work that was appearing in our microlearnings. So whether it was positive moments, whether it was name your emotions or name your feelings, whether it was some of the mindfulness pieces that we talked about, bringing that language and those skills, or some of the quotes like, hey, got this from here, right? Compassion fatigue, some of the other things we just, that you might run into within here, tying it into our staff meetings and other team meetings, because, just making intentional connections to it shows that it is valuable, and it just kind of gives those regular reminders to people too of like, oh yeah, I probably would benefit from participating in that, and I'll go back in and go revisit it.
So I think you've already been touching on this a lot about kind of how your staff felt and reacted to the program. And I was wondering if you could kind of speak specifically to what kind of feedback did you hear from your staff about it?
Yeah. I think what I would say is the most important feedback is that it's good, that it's valuable, that they see the inherent value of it. What I don't think I ever got was that this just isn't good. I'm not going to do this, right? Any of the I'm struggling to keep up comments were much more related to their own time commitments. And so we worked through some of those things. But I think the primary feedback was, what I would honestly say, and this sounds simple, and I actually had this conversation with my BLT yesterday. It sounds simple and obvious, but the people who benefited the most were the people who needed it the most, which to me is a major win. It's that thing of, if you can do anything that's universally beneficial to everybody, but is going to be really impactful for big groups, or even just sometimes small groups, and whether it's in your classroom as a teacher or whether it's in your school as a leader of adults, it's worthwhile, because everybody gets some benefit. But I can honestly say the people who benefited the most were the people who needed it the most throughout the course of this pandemic impacted year, if you will. And so the feedback I got was, they struggled to keep up with the timing piece sometimes. I don't want to say everybody connected to everything, but nobody, that's never going to be the case. Not everybody's ever going to connect to everything I deliver or ask them to do. But they all saw the value in it, which I think was the most important thing. And then by us talking about how we can incorporate it into our practices, making that real intentional alignment and tie-in, I think that really helped as well.
Cool. Did you see any effects of as you went through the program, like changes? And I think that there's kind of two ways. And there's kind of like anecdotal things you saw or perceived that were changing because of the work you're doing with SEL for adults, or also if there was any like actual like change in tangible data that you collected around like this is such a weird year. It's data collection is so weird in general, but if there's anything that you saw that you could track.
I think from an effect standpoint, I think we did see effects. I would say where we saw the biggest effects were people having mindfulness and shared vocabulary of how to communicate with each other, how to support each other, how to support our kids. So the 3 modules we've worked within, and then each module has had 3 units. I believe one of them might have had 4, but I think that's the typical layout is 3 modules, or 3 units per module, and then the series of microlearnings within each unit. We participated in managing stress, which that's where we said that one's going to be most relevant. Can we just start there instead? Building trust, and then we're currently working on advancing equity. And equity work has never been more timely in my view. Not that it wasn't timely before and shouldn't have been more timely and more important and impactful sooner down the road, or sooner earlier, right? But so I think just even the content has been extremely relevant. And I would say that has also had an effect of helping to further the work we're already doing and committed to. So it's hard to point out, some of the effects in isolation, just because for us, it was aligned to work we were committed to doing. But I think it was clearly and obviously a support to the work that we were doing and a part of the work that we were doing. I would say I've had conversations with individual staff members that have talked to me about how much they've benefited from some of the specific microlearnings. I think some of the impacts and some of the benefits have been even outside of what the desired or stated impact or goal of some of the microlearnings were, which is, just as far as building that trust and community within our staff and building relationships and language that allow them to collaborate with each other more effectively and to monitor themselves. The layout of the units as well, where you kind of focus on yourself, the first one, and then you kind of focus with your team, the second one, and the third one is usually how does it go over to your kids. So I think even that layout allowed different layers of how do we roll this out with folks. But I think we learned a lot of strategies with managing stress, for example, that we can reference and add to our repertoire, tool belts that all of us educators like. With the trust piece, I think that was hugely important. That came at an important time for us in the middle of the winter. Just like, how do you trust yourself, your team, your students, and build that trust? And then equity hitting in the spring when it did, again, it was just timely for us. And so it's helped contribute to the work that we're doing.
I've got one last question.
Yeah.
And it's kind of around what your plans are for the future with this.
Yeah. We are definitely, sorry, I don't know if I cut you off on your question.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah. Our future plans with this is we're definitely rolling forward with it for a second year. We haven't finished all of the content that exists even yet. And I know in working with Committee for Children and Second Step that there's still some pieces in further development. We're finishing the year with unit 2 of the advancing equity work. So we're not going to quite get through the third unit of that. And then I know there's some further components being considered. So for us, next year will be about intentionally going back and incorporating some of the things we learned this year, making sure that it wasn't a one-off. We've done that. Now we're good at it, right? Now that's not how it works, as we know. And then we're just going to continue to learn more and get better at more of it. So definitely something that we're committed to continuing into next year.
Are you planning on doing modules that you've done already this year with all your staff next year, or do you see it more as something as in like an onboarding for new staff?
It's a good question. I think some of both, probably. I think where we will find the most value is pulling those impactful pieces from the most impactful pieces for us. And it might be different in each building, but we know which ones were most impactful for us. So when we go back and review those different modules we've already completed, there's going to be, for us, it really felt like there were 2 to 3 micro learnings within each one that really just kind of felt super relevant within the moment or within the time. And some of them are meant to be more reflective anyways and prompting your work to do those things. And so that's kind of how it's laid out anyways. They're not all meant to be like super heavy thought inducing pieces, right? Some of it is like actually taking time to process the work in the next micro learning. But we're totally going to incorporate some of what we previously learned while continuing to move forward. But then as we have new staff, looking at how do we incorporate it with them as well. One thing we didn't get to do as much of this year with how our partnership was rolled out was we didn't get to do all of everything with my classified staff. And that's something I would love. We incorporated them in parts and some of them participated more than others, but it always kind of ended up being on their own time, which I don't feel good about. So I think that would also be a goal for me as a leader of this is how do we spread this to our classified staff with more fidelity as well.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. So the very last thing I want to ask is, is there anything that you wish we would have asked that we didn't?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything I wish that you would have asked other than, for somebody who is looking for a tool that can create a well-researched tool and product and resource that you can use with your staff to create common language, but also as something you can tie that shows you're committed to honoring your staff as people. I know for me as a leader, everything we do in education is about people. It's about the student as a person. And for me as the leader of the building, it's about the people I work with who happen to be teachers, happen to be paraeducators, but it's about people. So anything you can do as a leader to show that you're committed to your staff as people pays off in spades. I don't know how else to say that. So it's worth the time, it's worth the alignment. There's a number of ways to align this to other initiatives you're doing anyways. And so more than anything, I wish you'd ask, that would just be what I would hope people take away from what they can find value in. It is like everything else too, in that if you're not willing to make it a priority, you might want to really consider it, but it's worth making a priority is what I would say, because nothing we do, if we don't prioritize it, typically works very well. But we prioritize this work this year. And I think that would be what I would want reflected in a question that had been asked to unpack some of that is, at the end of the day, this has been a really worthwhile use of our time throughout this school year. And again, I have appreciated as a principal when we've gotten to a couple weird or tricky spots this year, or when we're dealing with something else that's seemingly unrelated, that we can say, oh, let's go back to here where we talked about this. Here's a tool we can go back and reference as a building, but also I've taken heart at knowing individually in these independent microlearnings, people are getting benefit. I've heard it from enough people in their own reflections to know that there's others who are benefiting as well, that I just don't get as much of that intentional reflection on. So I think that's what I would pass on. That's the most important value of all this, is us taking care of ourselves as adults helps us to take care of our kids, but just even us taking care of ourselves as adults is equally as important.
All right. Well, Keith, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I imagine you've got a busy day that you're stepping away from, and we'll be stepping back into very soon. And I think on behalf of everybody in the Second Step educator community, we really appreciate you taking the time to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on this new program.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a pleasure to be involved with it this year, and I was happy to join this morning.
And I just want to remind everybody that there is a community where we can continue these conversations, and as this talking about social emotional learning for adults, and all the other programs from Second Step, you can come and join us in the Second Step educator community, where we have thousands of educators just like yourselves who are using our programs, who've come together to support each other and to connect with the program itself. And if you're watching this in the community, thank you very much. You already know about it, but if you're watching on Twitter or on YouTube and you would like to join the Second Step educator community, here's the info right here. And so until then, hopefully I see you in the community, and we'll be back again next week with another one of these live streams about the social emotional learning for adults program. So until then, everybody, stay healthy and take care. Thank you very much.